You're sitting alone in a quiet apartment on a Friday night. Nothing's actually wrong, no immediate danger anywhere near you. And yet there's this specific, heavy, almost physical ache sitting in your chest, the same kind of ache you might associate with hunger or cold or actual physical pain. Nobody's threatening you. You're safe, fed, warm, physically completely fine. And your body is reacting as though none of that is true. Because as far as your evolutionary programming is concerned, none of that is actually true. As far as roughly 200,000 years of human biology is concerned, you are, right now, in genuine mortal danger. This is going to sound like an exaggeration, and it isn't. The feeling of loneliness, that specific, distinct, almost physically painful ache of social isolation, isn't a modern emotional quirk or an unfortunate byproduct of contemporary life. It's an ancient, deeply evolved alarm system, built by natural selection under conditions where being cut off from your group wasn't an inconvenience. It was, in the most literal possible sense, a countdown to death. And the genuinely unsettling part is that your body still runs that exact same emergency response today, every single time you feel meaningfully lonely, regardless of whether you're actually in any danger at all. Let's start with why exile from the group was such an extreme threat in the first place. Because understanding the actual stakes involved is essential to understanding why your brain still treats isolation with this much alarm. We've talked before on this channel about how small hunter-gatherer bands, typically 20 to 50 individuals, maintained order through escalating social sanctions, gossip, ridicule, ostracism, and in the most extreme cases, execution. What we didn't dwell on as much in that video is exactly what ostracism, full exclusion from the group, actually meant for an individual's odds of physical survival in a Paleolithic environment, because the honest answer is that it was catastrophic, in a way that's genuinely difficult for a modern person to fully internalize. A single human, alone, in a landscape full of large predators, with no one to watch for danger while sleeping, no one to help process a large kill or share food during a lean stretch, no one to help if you got injured or fell seriously ill, faced dramatically reduced odds of survival compared to someone embedded in a cooperative group. Anthropological and ethnographic research on documented hunter-gatherer societies consistently finds that group membership was, without meaningful exception, treated as existentially essential, not a social nicety layered on top of survival, but a core structural component of survival itself. Exile wasn't a punishment that made your life harder. In the environment your ancestors' brains actually evolved in, it was frequently a punishment that ended your life outright, whether through predation, starvation, or a treatable injury that, without help, simply wasn't treated. Given that reality, running for literally hundreds of thousands of years across an enormous number of human generations, it would be genuinely strange, from a purely evolutionary engineering standpoint, if human psychology hadn't developed some kind of extremely powerful, extremely motivating internal alarm system specifically designed to detect social disconnection and drive urgent behavioral correction before actual exile occurred. And that's exactly what loneliness appears to be. Not a bug. Not an unfortunate glitch in an otherwise well-designed system. A feature, operating exactly as intended, an early warning system evolved to make social disconnection feel bad enough, urgently enough, that you'd be strongly motivated to fix it before it became a literal survival emergency. Here's where the actual biology gets genuinely remarkable and considerably more physical than most people expect walking into this topic, because loneliness doesn't just feel emotionally unpleasant. It measurably changes what's happening inside your body, at a level your immune system directly participates in. Researcher Steve Cole, working at UCLA, has spent years studying something called the conserved transcriptional response to adversity, a genuinely important finding in modern social genomics research showing that chronic loneliness is associated with a measurable shift in gene expression within immune cells, specifically an increase in the activity of genes associated with inflammation, and a corresponding decrease in the activity of genes associated with antiviral immune response. In plain terms, lonely people's immune systems appear to shift their operational priorities, ramping up inflammatory response, the kind of immune activity useful for healing physical wounds like bites, cuts, or bleeding injuries, while dialing down antiviral defenses, the kind of immune activity more useful for fighting off infections typically encountered through sustained close contact with other people. Think about what that pattern actually implies once you sit with it directly, because it's genuinely telling. Your immune system, under conditions of chronic loneliness, appears to be preparing for physical injury, specifically the kind of injury an isolated individual without group protection would have been at dramatically higher risk of: predator attacks, accidents faced without help, physical trauma sustained while alone and unprotected. Rather than preparing for the kind of infectious disease risk that actually increases when you're surrounded by lots of other people in close proximity. Your body, in other words, appears to be unconsciously calculating that loneliness specifically predicts physical danger rather than infectious disease risk, and reallocating genuinely significant biological resources accordingly. Exactly the calculation that would have made evolutionary sense for an ancestor facing actual physical exile from a protective group, and exactly the calculation that makes considerably less practical sense for a modern person feeling isolated while sitting safely alone in a locked apartment. The mechanism hasn't caught up to the modern environment. It's still running the ancient math. This connects directly to genuinely serious, well-documented long-term health consequences, and it's worth being direct about the scale of this rather than treating it as an abstract biological curiosity. Research led by psychologist John Cacioppo, whose work on loneliness became foundational to this entire field of study, along with numerous subsequent large-scale studies and meta-analyses, has consistently found that chronic loneliness is associated with measurably elevated risk of cardiovascular disease, weakened immune function, accelerated cognitive decline, and, in some of the more widely cited meta-analytic findings, an overall increase in mortality risk comparable in magnitude to well-established risk factors like smoking or obesity. This isn't a minor statistical footnote. It represents one of the more consistently replicated findings in modern health psychology, and it makes considerably more sense once you understand loneliness as your body actively, physiologically preparing for a threat level that, for the overwhelming majority of human evolutionary history, chronic social isolation genuinely, accurately predicted. There's a second piece of this story worth spending real time on, because it involves something genuinely striking about how your brain physically processes social rejection specifically, distinct from loneliness in general. Neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberger, in research that's become widely cited across the field, used brain imaging to study what happens neurologically when people experience social exclusion, and found that social rejection activates regions of the brain, particularly the anterior cingulate cortex, that substantially overlap with the regions activated by actual physical pain. This wasn't a loose metaphorical finding. It was a direct, measurable neurological overlap, strong enough that some of Eisenberger's subsequent research found that acetaminophen, ordinary over-the-counter pain medication, measurably reduced self-reported social pain and reduced activity in these same overlapping brain regions in controlled experimental settings. Your brain, at a genuinely fundamental level, appears to process the pain of social rejection using substantially the same neural hardware it uses to process a physical injury. The phrase "it hurt to be excluded" isn't simply a figure of speech your language happens to use metaphorically. At the level of your actual brain activity, being excluded and being physically hurt appear to share a meaningfully overlapping neurological signature. Now here's the genuinely important reframe. The modern mismatch this entire evolutionary system creates, because your ancient alarm system was calibrated for an environment that no longer exists in the way it once did, and that mismatch matters enormously for understanding modern loneliness specifically. Your ancestors' loneliness alarm evolved under conditions where feeling disconnected from your specific 20 to 50 person band was an extremely accurate, reliable signal of genuine physical danger, because there was, quite literally, no alternative source of protection or cooperation available anywhere nearby. Modern life has fundamentally decoupled that ancient signal from its original, accurate trigger condition. You can feel intensely, physiologically lonely while living in a city of millions of people, surrounded constantly by other humans, none of whom pose you any danger and many of whom would likely help you if something actually went wrong, because the specific kind of deep, embedded, mutually interdependent social bond your ancient alarm system is actually calibrated to detect Not just physical proximity to other humans, but genuine reciprocal social connection has become considerably harder to reliably maintain in a modern social environment built around large, anonymous, geographically dispersed populations rather than small, tightly bonded, mutually dependent groups. This is genuinely worth understanding clearly, because it reframes chronic loneliness as something considerably more serious than simple unhappiness or a personal failing to be more socially active. It's your ancient survival machinery, doing exactly the job it evolved to do, misfiring specifically because the modern social environment has drifted so far from the small, tightly interdependent conditions that machinery was originally built to monitor. The inflammatory response, the elevated health risks, the neurological overlap with physical pain, none of it is your body malfunctioning randomly. It's your body running an ancient, urgent, life or death protocol in a modern context where the actual physical danger that protocol evolved to anticipate usually, though importantly not always, isn't really there anymore. There's something worth sitting with as we close this out, and it's worth saying directly and clearly rather than leaving implied. If you recognize this feeling in your own life, if that specific ache of disconnection has been sitting with you for a while, it's genuinely worth taking seriously, not dismissing as an overreaction or a personal weakness, precisely because your body isn't overreacting at all. It's running exactly the ancient program it was built to run, and reaching out, rebuilding connection, or talking to someone you trust, a friend, a doctor, a mental health professional, isn't indulging in oversensitive modern feeling. It's responding to one of the oldest, most serious alarm systems your body has, exactly the way it was built to be responded to, by moving back toward connection rather than further from it.